So welcome to our latest episode of the Conscious Finance podcast, and I am delighted and honoured to be joined today by Peaches Golding, OBE, who is the Lord Lieutenant for our city of Bristol. And for those that don't know what the Lord Lieutenant role is, correct me if I'm wrong, Peaches, but you are the representative for the Crown in our county. Is that right?
That sounds good. I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I'm the King's personal representative in the county.
Amazing. And your background, I think, is amazing. I'd love to delve into your story a little bit more, but just outside looking in, looks like you started out as a zoologist from the US originally, North Carolina, am I right? And then moved to the UK, became a presenter for the ITV?
For the BBC. I
BBC.
presented for the Natural History Unit.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Then an entrepreneur in your own right, had your own marketing business. You became High Sheriff as well, and many different business ventures and consultancy work, which has now led you to Lord Lieutenant. So zoologist to Lord Lieutenant, I'm really interested in how that came about and your story, really. So if you could give us a whistle stop, that would be amazing.
Well, I find it absolutely amazing as well, and I can't believe that I have this most prestigious role. It is humbling to be chosen to do it, because that's the way it works. Your county chooses you. So why am I a zoologist? I think because my great-uncle Sherman had 2 huge ponds in his back garden full of shebonchan fish. And he kept bees, and he was just the most amazing man that you could imagine. And the mixture of him with his interests in wildlife, and my mother being a teacher in a classroom where the children would bring whatever insect or reptile they had found in the garden to display and talk to their fellow or students with, So I don't know, I just kind of grew up around plants, and it seemed like the easiest thing to study.
Amazing.
You always study the things that come easily.
And what was it like growing up in North Carolina in your youth?
I always think that I had a charmed upbringing. My father was a university professor, and as I said earlier, my mum taught school. So they had the same holidays that we kids had.
Oh, great.
And my dad wanted to be everywhere where anything interesting was happening. So we would go to the most amazing places. And at that time, and I'm thinking about my preteen years, at that time, one didn't realize the barriers of segregation, for example, because I grew up in segregated America. You didn't think, or at least I didn't think about those things. Parents, I believe, certainly did do, and one of the things that they wanted to do for us girls, my sister and myself, was to make sure that we had the skills and the ability to navigate whatever system there was. So, I think we had a charmed life.
Great. And then what brought you to the UK?
Well, there was that amazing thing where, again, growing up, my dad had invited lots of people from lots of different countries that would be at the university to come into our home. So we met people from different places, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. And I had the opportunity to go to secondary school in Colombia for a term and live with a family. And so a little bit later, or a little bit earlier, it doesn't matter when, but there was a university student getting his master's and his doctorate's degree from Africa. And so he called our house his home during the non-term times, so Christmas, holidays, whatever. And so Thaddeus was my big brother. And he, was around and very inspiring and taught me the very English word thus. I mean, Americans don't use thus. I remember looking it up in a book. What does thus mean? But Thaddeus was a great influence. And once I finished university, once I graduated, I thought, well, why not? I have an opportunity to go to West Africa. I'll just go and we'll see what happens.
Amazing.
And that's what happened.
So you went to West Africa.
I went to West Africa.
And then?
And then I met my husband, who happened to be, at that time, the director of a zoo.
Wow.
So he established probably the largest public amenity in Black Africa by the time that we left in 1979, 1980. Mm-hmm. And it was a wonderful zoo. He hand grew some gorillas whose mothers had been killed. So he took them from just little tiny 1-year-old-ish babies and grew them up to the male was a silverback by the time he left 16 years later.
Wow. And that was Bob?
That was Bob.
Yeah, I remember you showing me photos. Handsome man.
I think so.
Handsome man, yeah. And he had an amazing career as well by the sounds of things, and recently has a documentary that's come out with the BBC. Is that right? That's
exactly right, yes. The BBC World Service did one of their programs called Witness History on Bob, and that's only a 9-minute program, and you can find that if you're interested on the BBC's iPlayer. But they also did another one about the zoo in Ibadan and why everybody's talking about the zoo in Ibadan. I haven't heard that one yet.
Great.
It's an hour long.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
For sure. So then, is that when you came to the UK after Africa?
That's right. So we left West Africa and came back to London for a while, where he was at Chessington Zoo as an executive director and built several things there. And then we went up to Cotswold Wildlife Park, nice, where he built a tropical house and various other bits of accommodation. Mm-hmm. And then we decided we wanted to live in Bristol. And so to Bristol we came.
Amazing.
And now I'm still there. Can you imagine?
Well, it is a great city.
It's a great city. It's a great city.
What then made you take that fork in the road along the sort of business path, would you say?
I always thought, somewhere deep in the dark recesses of my mind, that I would set up a business. Mm-hmm. When I worked for Bristol City Council in economic development, one of my responsibilities was to look after cooperatives and smaller businesses, but also to help out on some of those larger projects and initiatives. So that was at the time when Lloyds Bank was moving part of its business out of London into Bristol, when Hewlett-Packard was setting up their research labs here in Bristol, where DuPont was coming in. All sorts of interesting things were taking place at that time. And so running a business, being in that business community, was something that sort of rang well. And of course, when we left Cotswold Wildlife Park in 1980, probably 3, Bob set up his own consultancy and did a lot of work around the United Kingdom, around Europe and America and various places.
Okay.
So, yeah, we had the tandem. I was little me too.
Amazing. So then you had your own business, then started getting involved in the High Sheriff appointment, is that right, for a year? How did that come about?
Yes, well, life is always strange, isn't it, the way that it unravels. So let's go back to when I first moved into Bristol. And one of the things that I ran into was an organization called Business in the Community and the work that they were doing with the Prince of Wales, at the time, our king now. So that was interesting, and I did some work with them doing a range of fun things, awarding money to small businesses to help them get established. One of those people that I happened to give money to ended up 10 years later as being the Prince of Wales photographers, one of the photographers. So we met later in life.
Great.
And
It's funny how things come back around.
It is. It just really, really, really is. So business in the community was a great way for me to start working with corporate responsibility. What is it that businesses do in addition to employing people, in addition to clogging up the roads and having emissions and doing all of those things that impact on communities? You know, what's the positive things that businesses can do other than employ people? So that was a great learning. It was a great opportunity. And I think that the visibility that gave me in the city was one of the things that led to my having been recognized as a potential high sheriff. Now, for those people that don't know, the king in each of the 98 counties in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland has 2 appointments. So one appointment is the Lord Lieutenant's appointment, and that's a long-term role, because only over that period of time can you see the dial move. Whereas the High Sheriff looks at that law and order and justice agenda. I was appointed to that. And I guess the interesting things are, one, the ability to serve and to make links between communities and the royal activities. But also it's the oldest secular office in the country. You know, it goes back to 800. I said that, 800. You know, the Norman conquest would not have happened without the sheriff being in place.
Amazing.
You know, Henry VIII would not have had his navy without the sheriff being in place. You know, taxes would not have been collected and paid over. You would not have had so many things in this country without the high sheriff. So it was great privilege to be appointed to such an esteemed role.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's amazing to hear of your journey, and there seems to be definitely a common theme in terms of your purpose and the underlying sort of values that you hold dear. So how would you describe your why and your values as a person?
I think sometimes these things do not reveal themselves early on. I think you need a moment of reflection to understand where you make your greatest impact, and you do that most easily. It is something that connects with the depths of your soul, the thing that makes your back straighten up and you stand tall. It's the thing that inspires you without enormous amounts of work. It's the statistics and the facts that you learn and coagulate around those. And it's only by reflecting on where it is you have the greatest impact because of those things that you really determine your purpose. And I think your purpose is not a stationary, static thing. I think that throughout your life, it will change. There are times when my purpose was to make sure that little boy growing up in the house had the ability, the challenge, the commitment, skills, and all of that to be a good person. But once you start working and perhaps doing other things, that domestic purpose will change to something different. And I think in this part of my life, which I've probably been in for the last probably 30, 40 years, who knows how much longer it will continue, it's about helping to create a fairer and a more just society. And I think when I'm doing things around that, I'm most effective, I'm most in tune with myself and my values and those sorts of things.
Love that. And where do you think that came from? What experiences in life made that your soul driving purpose at this time in your life, would you say?
I guess there are a number of things. When I look back at my youth, certainly parents and their influences were very, very strong. My father, for example, had a civil rights sort of life.
Okay.
And here in this country, people know of Rosa Parks, who refused to sit on the back of the bus in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. She was the third person in America to take that stand. My father was the second person.
That's amazing.
In America to do that. And that was 9 years before Rosa Parks.
Gosh.
So there's something that sort of bubbles around. Although my mother was very clear when my dad said he wanted to do that civil rights thing, my mother said, no, I don't think so. I think there are other things that you can do and you can do better. And my father agreed, but he always had that fire about how do we make civil rights something that is not even second nature, it's something that we just do. So I think that has had a bearing on my life. And I think also having broken through lots of glass ceilings, I keep bumping my head against glass ceilings. So I can recall when a group of about 10 or 12 parents got together and said, we will desegregate the school system. And so we were the first little black kids to go to a school that previously was a white school, pulling together two separate school systems. So I just have always done things. We talked about the high sheriff role. Before me, the first black person to take the role was a chap called Nathaniel Wheels in 1818. Wow. And between 1818 and 2010, there were no other people of color that were high sheriffs. So, I've kind of bumped through that one. And I guess, I know, with Lord Lieutenant, again, I'm the first black woman to ever hold that role. Since it was created. That's right, by 1540. So there's this thing that says, I always tend to be in this place which says, how do we make it fairer? How do we make it more just? How do we use the best of all the talents that are there? And even when I set up the business, darn it, I thought marketing, market research, because that was what I was doing. Until the Prince of Wales said, well, if you can have blue chip customers, why is it that other people aren't having it? Because I'm not seeing it across the kingdom. Come and work with me on how we change the supply chain, how we change the marketing, how we change the employment, how we get more black people being economically active at senior levels. So I always tend to get pulled back into that. So again, my purpose and that thing where people think I can add value align. And I imagine it's the same for many other people out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a common theme with the guests on this podcast, really, where they have that innate hunger to want to drive change. And I think that awakening is only snowballing in our society, which is great. And it's good to see the B Corp business movement, for example, being a force for good, and organisations in general just wanting to be better, which I think sort of leads us nicely on to the next question, really. And from your perspective, you've probably seen how all sorts of different organisations, institutions, public services, governments can all work together to improve impact collaboratively, and you've probably also seen where it doesn't work, and businesses are quite guilty sometimes of working in silos. What do you think is the best solution for closing that inequality gap that exists in our city and improving and creating a more just society?
I think it is more complex than ever it appears on the surface, as are most things. The more you delve into things, the more complexity one discovers. And I think there is knowledge and myth busting that's important. And it's important from all sides. I think individuals, when they're younger, need to feel that they're part of society, that their skills, their interests are very important, and we recognize that and we value that. The more youth clubs that we seem to lose, and playgrounds that we lose, and activities for young people that we lose, the more we can ingrain the wrong type of messages. So I think there's something about valuing young people and enabling them to examine their potential and have the wherewithal to fulfill that, regardless of where economically they might sit, where geographically they might sit, whether it's a one-parent family or a two-parent family, or 3 or 10 or 20, because it takes a community to raise a child. So I think there's some of that. And I think that educators, therefore, have to be very clear about how they release the potential of those young people. And, it's very easy to put someone off. It is also very easy to encourage somebody to do something fantastic.
Yeah.
Create that opportunity.
I love that quote. It's easier to light a fire within someone than light a fire underneath them. And it's interesting, there's been a common theme with the last few guests, actually. We had Poku in earlier from Babasa, who talked about how, from his mentorship program with young people, he was surprised how many educators and teachers almost dampen people's belief that they couldn't amount to anything. And I think it's so important, the role of a teacher, because they're the role models, aren't they, at that age? And they're very moldable and malleable at that age. And I think instilling that belief is such a big part of it.
I'm a great one for exchanges. I mean, having, as I mentioned earlier, gone to school and lived in a family, in a different language and a certainly different setting. Exchanges give you enormous opportunities to learn things. And I want to do exchanges between young people and older people, and people living here and people living there, and people doing this and that, because it's only when you see life through someone else's lens that you can actually see things. We can imagine what it's like, but unless you see it. And actually, the Prince of Wales, the King, when he was Prince of Wales, had this program called Seeing is Believing. And one of the great things that I did was I took business leaders into the mosque. Never been into a mosque. And then we can talk about the religion. We can talk about all of the links between Islam and Christianity and Judaism, because the three have the same root. You talk about these things. You talk about what you need to do in the workplace to enable people like that to excel, feel comfortable. And then, you take them to the Sikh Gurdwara, and you take them to the synagogue, and you take them all sorts of places. And, those conversations start meaning something, because you get the leaders of those faiths, for example, together. And then I took them into places like prisons. And, that was great fun. I remember on one occasion we were going through, I was planning this visit with the prison governor, and I said, oh, well, if we're doing that journey of somebody, being admitted into the prison, I said, shouldn't we have the little dogs there? Can we have the little dogs? And they said, no, you can't have the little dogs, because this is a prison, and if somebody happens to have on their wherewithal something that excites the dogs, they might not be able to get out. And I thought, we won't have the little dogs. But we did everything else, the fingerprinting, the sit down and have your photograph taken, the this is where your cell is. And we also had an opportunity to meet people who were in prison and understand what in their lives led them on a path that ended up in a prison. But more importantly, what businesses could do alongside those people in prison so that when they come out the other side, they feel part of society again, because that's very important. Who meets you at the prison gate? What job-ready skills can we provide people? How do we use the system that allows people in prison to come out and work on a day release and then go back in? How do you prepare people? Because they've got to be part of society again. You've got to rehabilitate people. You can't continue to build prisons. You can't continue to lock great brains up, because many people in prison are very, very clever. And there are many people that aren't in prison that have done some dastardly things, but just haven't got caught yet. So, taking people to interesting places was a very good way of awakening in them and their businesses what they could do to make this place a better place.
I love that idea. It's just putting them in other people's shoes, which I think is quite easy to forget sometimes when people are so blinkered or short-sighted on, what's 1 meter in front of them. I love that idea. Are there any, I guess, for the listeners who are in the business world, what advice would you give them when it comes to improving their social impact? Where do they start? What's worked really, really well in your eyes? And what areas do you think they should get involved with?
I like the idea of mentors. I like even better the idea of reverse mentors. Because very often there are people in your business whose lives you know very, very, very little about, but who have great ideas, great capabilities, and your business is just missing out on that because you've never had that discussion. So whenever you get that difference, mentoring someone in a leadership position, you can really start to examine, well, what are the things that make this work? What are the things that I'm missing? Where are the opportunities? And very often, you can identify things that either reduce your numbers of staff that leave, enable your staff to progress up a ladder, give you a new idea for a product or a service, look at an entirely different marketplace that you never even thought of. One of the great stories is IBM in America, very first computing company, doing really, really, really well, kind of lost the plot. But one thing they thought about was, guess what? We don't have a lot of dealers in black communities, so let's grow that marketplace. And they really penetrated an area where no other company was doing it. And, were able to recoup sales, able to recruit market share, do all sorts of things, spawn businesses in the meantime. So there are many, many examples like that. British Gas going into prisons and saying, gosh, you mean it costs more than £50,000 to keep somebody in prison? Heck, it cost me less than that to train some people. Let's find out who in prisons wants to learn how to do what we're doing. And, they had 30, 40 different people participating in schemes, which when they came out of prison, they were ready to go in the gas industry. Amazing. There are things that we can do.
I love that. And from, I guess, your experiences in the local Bristol community, are there any sort of organisations or groups where people could get involved to help collaborate with other like-minded organisations that you'd recommend?
I would be hesitant to recommend any one, but I can tell you there are literally hundreds of really good charities that do amazing work, from feeding homeless people to working with mothers who might have had some sort of mental health problems or challenges, perinatal, postnatal, helping to make them stronger and their children stronger, to ones that do gardening and grow amazing vegetables and feed people, to those that do the mentoring aspect and environmental work. I mean, there's a plethora, and that's fabulous because we need all of those organizations to be strong to help make our society whole.
Absolutely. I think for me, what I've found the most powerful when choosing our impact partners was just to really think a level deeper in terms of which ones align most with our purpose and our values. And when we chose the partners, we chose them for the long term, not just a short term one-off donation. These are 3-year minimum partnerships where you can really actually help, not just with donations, but pro bono work, volunteering, actually collaborating with the leaders and CEOs of those foundations to help with their strategy. So that's, I think, what's worked really, really well for us. And it just makes it so much more authentic as well when it is true to who you are as a business.
I think that's absolutely right. And then you realize that you can learn things too. Because sometimes when you're in a charity and they've had to manage on really, really, really tiny budgets, then you can identify where you could use your resources even better.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street. It's not just that you're giving to that charitable concern, but it's what you learn as well that also helps your business, also enables you to perform better, to be slicker, to be quicker, more efficient, more effective.
Yeah,
it's a two-way street.
For sure. And when you look forward to the future, what's your vision for our city?
Well, our city is amazing. I mean, Bristol is just the most amazing place. You look and you see the breadth of the economy, everything from a port and an airport to the way the motorways intersect, make it a great place to do business. You look at the skills, you've got universities, you've got really good colleges that help to give the training, whether it's, the first level of further education or to doctorates. We've got that. We've got an amazing cultural center. We've got performing arts, we've got fine arts, we've got Banksy, we've got, Aardman animation, we've got 5th generation, technologies that are out there in computing. We've got haptic stuff, where you put your hand over something and it changes something else.
I've seen that technology. It's amazing.
It's absolutely glorious. We've got all of that. We've got the digital communities. We've got a very good ability to grow businesses, from the engine shed to pervasive media to all these places that encourage businesses to grow. So we have a really good economy that's broadly based. Don't forget the financial sector, he says. I haven't. But we also have ingrained parts of our city which generation after generation have felt somehow distant from all of the neat stuff that's happening. So my son, for example, took some students from a school just in Easton and brought them up to the University of Bristol. And those young people had never seen the housing stock in Clifton. They had never seen the big buildings in Clifton. They'd never thought they'd walk into a university. And you think, my golly, many of those students would be absolutely gobbled up, eaten up by the opportunities that are there. Yes, come and join us, come and do this. We can do that, we can do the other. But for the distance that they felt, they didn't feel a bridge, they didn't feel a connection. And that's what we've got to do in our city. We've got to be able to reach out. And with our breadth of business, with the breadth of opportunity that we were just talking about, there's possibilities to make us a much stronger place. have a much stronger society, you know.
Yeah, because I think the inequality that exists in Bristol is quite eye-opening to anyone who learns more about it, because I think initially outside looking in, if you're not in it, you don't experience it, you don't see it. And there are systemic things that exist in our city that need fixing, like the catchment areas of schools, for example, in disadvantaged areas where, you know, if the kids are all going to that same school, and it's similar to the example we gave in 1950s in a way of, you know, very different demographics, but they're not getting to mix with people from more privileged backgrounds. They're not sort of learning different perspectives. They're very much in their silos, and that works both ways. So you the more privileged can't understand the less privileged. So I think until that systemic change can happen, it's then right, how can businesses and organisations inspire those young people who don't have that, like going back to what you said at the beginning, that belief, that, you know, that fire in their belly. They've definitely got the fire in their belly. I guess it's more that belief that they can achieve their dreams. And I think it's having those mentors and those people around them from business community or the great charities that exist like Babasa to try to sort of move the needle on that a little bit.
Yes, that's right. And so the question is, how does a business identify that? So you were saying that many of the links that you make with communities fit with the core of what your business is about. You have same values, you operate in similar areas. So your opportunity is through your staff, through the people that you might meet in your community, wherever that might be described or defined as. It could be your faith community, it could be your geographical community, it could be the community of adults whose children might go to something that your children might go to. You know, there are many, many opportunities. Just be creative. Even if it's, I mean, you tell me, some people will say, well, I don't know any Chinese people. I don't know any Indian people. Well, I bet you go to the takeaway, don't you? So there are opportunities out there.
Definitely.
You know, and all you have to do is ask and be humble and be willing to learn and be willing to say, gosh, I never knew that before. I'm ever so sorry. I didn't mean to say anything that was, you know, unkind, unthoughtful, because I did it because I didn't know any better. You know, just accept the fact that we all are fallible, and people will be able to take that on board too, and then we all get so much better at it, don't we?
I love that. Thank you, Peaches. How are we for time?
40 minutes.
40 done. We haven't really gone into the role of the Lord Lieutenant, but we have sort of explained what it is. Did you want to go into any more depth on that, or do you think we've covered enough to give people a flavour of?
I'll just define what a Lord Lieutenant does.
Perfect.
Because it's an amazing role.
It is an awesome role.
It's an awesome role.
Okay. So it'd be good for the listeners to explore a little bit more about the role of the Lord Lieutenancy and what you do day to day, just to try and understand it a little bit further, if you can.
It's a most privileged role. It is just an incredible role because, you know, we all see royalty around us. We all see the impact of the monarchy around us, whether it's looking at those red pillar boxes that used to have telephones in them. They're very scarce now, but we still see it on the coins that we have in our pockets, you know, the image of the monarch. We see them on our stamps. But also, you know, there is that constitutional role, and some of that expands beyond the role of the lieutenancy, and certainly that is the governing and the state matter, the fact that the king will receive his red boxes and be advised about and informed about matters of government. But we also see members of the royal family when they come into our communities and they highlight issues that are important. And so that is one of our principal roles as Lord Lieutenants, to link our county with the royal palaces and the royal palaces with our county and the things that are important to us. So one of my first royal visits was to take someone to a homeless center and talk about homelessness and all of the ways that this particular facility was trying to encourage those people at risk of being homeless to, again, fit back into society. You know, we've done international trade. We've looked at career opportunities. Maybe it's engineering. We've gone to churches to hear church music and cathedral music, because each of our members of the royal family have very different interests, and we can take those to, you know, marry up with activities in our own county. But royal visits aside, we do a whole range of other activities. So we carry out investitures, so we give people their medals for national honors. Even before that, we are involved in the whole of the honor system. How do we encourage people to nominate those that do amazing things in our communities, that go above and beyond? So how do we get those nominations for national honors? So we will carry out investitures, and we do all of the British Empire medalists. But we can do an investiture up to a knighthood, which is really quite fun.
Yeah.
We have religious things. So the king is the king of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, head of the Commonwealth, head of the church, okay? And so as that, there are certain roles within the Anglican Church which are roles that are appointed by the king. And in our local areas, we have to take part in those ceremonies for the enthronements of bishops, for example, and the installation of deans and canons.
Wow.
So that's amazing. Of course, the first duty of the king is to look after the people. So all of those military things are very important. So we, on Armed Forces Day, are very visible. On Remembrance Sunday, we lead the laying of wreaths at the cenotaph. So there's that military thing, and I'm actually attended by 4 cadets, one of each of the branches of the armed forces. And so they will accompany me on all sorts of activities, which again enlighten them and show them all of the opportunities that are out there. We give the King's Awards out and encourage businesses to apply for them. So the King's Awards for Enterprise are very much part of what we're about. And actually in April, I'm having a workshop where people from the Department of Business and Trade are going to join us here in Bristol and understand how to complete the application form for the King's Awards for Enterprise. Thanks. So those are in the categories of innovation and international trade and sustainable development and promoting opportunities, those 4 categories. And those businesses that are successful, we will give them their award. Likewise with the voluntary sector. The King has awards for voluntary sector organizations that use volunteers in the best possible way. So we encourage, and we also give out those awards. Anytime you have a long service award for the police or the fire or ambulance or any of those blue light services, those are King's Awards for long service and good conduct. Mm-hmm. And guess what? We get to give those out.
It must be so rewarding, but I guess it must keep you very busy as well.
It does. Plus, we get to go to schools, we get to open things, we get to cut ribbons, cut cakes, speak, any number of things. Yes, I do between maybe 8 to 12, 15 a week for the King. Wow. Every week.
Wow. And it's a long commitment as well, isn't it?
It is. The King expects between 7 and 12 or so years of voluntary service. We're not paid for the work that we do, other than the normal travel expenses to get from point A to point B. But it's not a remunerated role. We do it because we feel it helps to unify the country in a way that absolutely nothing else does. Absolutely nothing else does. So it's a great privilege to have been selected through that process of consultation. The Privy Council come out, they ask people, what's going on in your sphere of life? What's important for you? And who's best placed to lead the county through that transition?
God, it's such an honour to have that role, and it must give you so much fulfilment as well, but it's such a huge commitment, so
it is.
It's very admirable.
Well, we keep the role until our 75th birthday.
Wow.
So I have 1 or 2 years yet.
Many. And reporting directly to the king, what's he like?
Oh, I've had a charmed life, because the king and I, I've worked for the king for over 30 years and have watched him grow in that period of time. And I dare say he's watched me grow in that period of time as well. And we've worked on a range of agendas. I spoke about that racial diversity and gender diversity work. But we've also worked on environmental matters, because, the environment was the first of the corporate responsibilities that business adopted. And the king was right at the forefront of that. In 2003, I recall organizing my part of a national conference that he had called for businesses to understand climate change. What is climate change? How do we adapt to it? How do we mitigate it? What are the things that we ought to stop doing yesterday? How do we have a circular economy? All the things that we're talking about now, 21 years later.
Amazing. He's always been such a purpose-driven person, outside looking in, for sure.
Absolutely.
So finally, I guess just to finish, for all those young, aspiring sort of leaders out there of the future, what advice would you give them now?
I think my advice is really quite simple. And as a leader, you've already learned how to face challenges and show dedication and be committed to things and get things done on time within budget, and all of those skills. You've got those in bags. I would encourage people to meet and mix and mingle and try to understand people different from them, whether they're older or younger or of a different faith, ethnicity, area of interest. Challenge yourself to broaden your own horizons about what is there. And then use your business in the best way possible to help improve, enlarge, embroider upon the fabric of society, so that we are a more beautiful, a more united, a more unified, a more ambitious place, because that's within your gift. Those are the things that you can do.
Love that. What a way to finish. Thank you so much, Peaches. It's been an absolute honour, and we feel very lucky to have you on our podcast. And I just love your outlook on life. It's really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for asking me, inviting me to come today. It's been a great pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. So thanks for listening to the Conscious Finance podcast. It's really appreciated. And if you can help us increase our impact and inspire others, it would be much appreciated. All we ask is just subscribe to the podcast, give us a like or drop us a comment. It really does help get the word out there and expand our reach, and hopefully inspire others to drive their impact further. Thank you.